Okay, my clock says 6, so I think I'm ready. If everyone else is ready. Martha, do I need to wait at all?
No, you can start.
Okay. This meeting is being audio streamed live this evening, and the meeting is now being recorded. So welcome everyone for coming this evening or coming to your screens this evening. I will turn it over to Dr. Stallo for purpose and agenda.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Also, good evening. Our purpose in having study sessions is always to get a chance to share information with one another to ensure that board members have the information that they need and shared understanding so that we can make efficient decisions at board meetings and as we build trust with one another to serve the district. Tonight, we've got a couple things. Chrislyn Goodman is going to share some of the work that was done with the assessment committee and has a recommendation that she's bringing forward on behalf of our team. And then we will come back to the budget recommendations. You provided some direction to us, so we'll come back to those. And then there's some policy work on the agenda for this evening as well.
Okay. First on our agenda is a agenda monthly review, Board of Education agenda and working document. As Dr. Stallo mentioned, we'll continue our role in policy, our role in board governance with meeting prep and becoming more comfortable with Google Meets, since that seems to be what we'll be doing for a while yet, with other virtual meetings as well. And also on our working document, we referred to the budget discussion, the superintendent evaluation process, and again, our governance policies. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Stallo for superintendent evaluation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I believe you all received a packet today that had information in it. And what you would have found is there's two pieces of this. And this is traditionally how the board has agreed to do my annual evaluation. The first part is really the evidence of the work that my team has done throughout the year in terms of our district priority work. It seems like just yesterday that we kind of had a mid-year update on that work, but team members have provided a summary of the work, and then also in their summary they have a recommendation. So as a leadership admin team, we'll be looking at all of those recommendations and discussing additional direction and work that needs to be done for next year as we start then a conversation with you about district goals after that. The second part is I provided just a reflection on my job description, the other components that you evaluate as part of my overall evaluation. So you've got those documents, and I believe Martha will be sharing the link with you tomorrow for a SurveyMonkey opportunity for you to provide feedback on that evaluation. In addition, I also ask administrators, not part of my evaluation, but I also ask them to provide feedback and allow me some additional feedback, especially around the job description and leadership components. Obviously, they are all a huge part of the district goals and the work that's accomplished with that. And then you've got the timeline in front of you. So once that link, once you've completed that, then it gets handed back over to Lee, and we work through the process ultimately with by June, having a formal statement at the June board meeting. Anything else, Lee, that you'd like to add?
No, the only thing I'd add would be to not put it off. The documents look fairly thick, and then the survey takes a little bit of time too. So don't put it off to the last minute. That would be my only advice. So, okay, we'll move on then. Under oversight of operations, the adoption and implementation of Fast Bridge Learning. And I think Chrislyn is presenting that.
That's right. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Sorry, hello, chair and director. Nice to see everybody. Sorry for the informality. It's easy to slip into that being at home. But thanks. I've got an assessment update tonight, and we can go right into the next slide, Martha. So this assessment update really taps into three different strategic directions. So it's going to hit on not only the measuring student achievement and equity portion, but also the fiscal accountability and the providing a safe, secure, supportive environment for students. All right, next slide. So just to give a little bit of history of what assessment has been like in the district. So we previously have been and are currently using NWEA MAP assessments as well as AimsWeb Plus. Those are happening 3 times a year for students in grades 2 through 8. We went through that MTSS audit that I'm sure you've heard a lot about and has been pivotal in us making a lot of really great changes. One of the aspects that came out of that audit was to have an assessment audit. We completed that in winter in December. We looked at gaps in our assessment portfolio. And so by assessment portfolio, I mean all the different types of ways that we test and assess students, from standardized tests, tests that are run at the state level, things that happen in the classroom at the individual level. So we looked at gaps there as well as overlap. And that assessment audit committee was composed of a wide variety of educators in our district. So not just teachers, but also administrators, school psychologists, counselors. So many voices in that room. That group then made a recommendation, and that recommendation was then vetted and also taken to advisory, and they also recommend this change. So without further ado, the recommendation is to change to FastBridge Learning. So this is a different testing vendor. The information provided is more specific than what we currently get from map testing. I also don't want to be misleading. It's also just different information. So when we use map testing, we get information about different aspects of where students might be in attaining state standards. And with FastBridge Learning, we get really specific information about where students are in their skill building, those skills being needed to attain the state standards. One of the aspects of FastBridge is that it would mean that there would be less time in testing for students. So instead of taking both AimsWeb Plus and doing the MAP assessments, students would just be doing the FastBridge Learning assessments, take about 25 minutes. Currently, the AimsWeb Plus assessments take about 25 minutes, maybe a little bit more, and the MAP assessments, excuse me, are averaging about 2 hours in our district. The FastBridge Learning also includes a social emotional screener. This is something that came out of that MTSS audit that we were lacking, and certainly with the information from the Minnesota Student Survey, that's something that we want to make sure that we've got available for all students. FastBridge Learning is also a cost-effective measure. So it comes in about half the cost of MAP testing and about the same price as AimsWeb Plus. And again, this recommendation came with input from a very large group of Prior Lake Savage Area School stakeholders, teachers, administrators, school psychs, counselors, and then also the advisory committee. All right, next slide. The FastBridge Learning is recommended to be implemented in reading for grades K through 8 and math in grades K through 8. This is also part of the recommendations of the MTSS audit. We formerly weren't using a screener in kindergarten and first for math, and so this will provide us with that. It also provides that social emotional screener, as I was talking about, for grades K all the way through 12. And a really great feature of this particular SEL screener is that it has not only a teacher component where the teacher is assessing students, but the students do some self-assessment, and then there's the opportunity for teachers and students to see where that aligns or doesn't, and can really help identify where there might be need for groups of students and individuals. All right. The FastBridge recommendation also, the tool itself includes growth measures. So we'll be able to predict and chart and look at what's happening from fall to spring, fall to winter, spring to spring. We'll have all of those growth measures available. We'll be able to use it as well for progress monitoring. So this is especially important for students that might have IEPs or are in intervention groups. So we want to be able to make sure we're able to chart their progress at exactly the level they're at. The other aspect of FastBridge is that it is an online adaptive administration. So that means that instead of groups of teachers going around and testing students individually or in groups, students will go or use computers as a class and do the online administration all at one time. And then there are some other implications of this. So clearly, one aspect of the change will mean a commitment to a communication plan that everybody can understand. So that's students, teachers, and parents. I have a note here about spring testing. Clearly, that was interrupted this year. And so that really means we're going to be starting new in the fall in some different ways. We will definitely be investing our time in training to make sure that teachers have the information that they need. And that really goes hand in hand with the support so that teachers not only know how to administer it, but then also to make that data useful and be able to plan instruction based on that. Some of the other implications of this change are in programming. So we've currently used MAP, scores to inform programmatic decisions. So to see if students are in different programs, like maybe SAGE, for example, is one, or advanced programming at the middle school level. And FastBridge also provides scaled scores and national percentiles. So we'll be able to use that there. All right, that concludes my portion.
Does anyone have any questions for Kristin? Stacy?
I just want to reiterate, Kristen, just to make sure. Is it replacing both Ames Web and the NWEM? Both, correct?
That's correct. So both NWEA and Ames Web will go away, and FastBridge will be there. FastBridge is actually a little bit more because it means we'll have some math and reading in grades K and 1, and then we'll also have a social emotional screener, and that'll go K-12. So it's more than both of those.
Okay. And so as far as, I know you talked a little bit about like onboarding the process. What do you anticipate time for people becoming comfortable with it, understanding? Because you said there's different measures and things like that and how they're used. Like, what does that process look like?
Sure. So there's some initial training to make sure that everyone can actually get students, just the really basics of logged in and actually taking the assessment. And then there's training that would take place over time for using those assessments and the results. And that's a process that I would say is not a one-shot deal or a one and done. That's over time, over a few years to get to the deepest level that we want all teachers to be able to access, and administrators too.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, did you have something to add?
Just a clarification, Kristin, can you speak to, are we anticipating using map testing for some of our programmatic determinations? We'll have a little bit of map testing, correct?
The place where it's still looking like we would be wanting to involve some map testing is Spanish language math is one at La del Lago, is a place where programmatically that would make sense to continue.
Any other questions? I don't see any. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, Melissa, did you have a question? Sorry.
I do, thanks. What is the difference in the investment of this platform versus what we've used in the past?
This is about, do you want the actual dollar figure per student? Okay, it's about $7.50 a student, which is about the same as what the Ames Web Plus costs, and it's half the cost of the NWEA map, which is around $13 a student.
Thank you.
Mary?
Yeah, does that mean we're not going to be, can we get out of the maintenance agreement with the Ames Web, or how's that going to work?
Right, so we would be transferring out of the Ames Web agreement and the NWEA map.
And we can do that at the end of the year, or are we paid up for more than a few years?
We can get out of that. Yeah, we don't have to renew. We don't have to re-up.
Okay. And I missed it, but how much teacher training will be involved in this, or will there be any needed? Just because
Yes, there'll definitely be teacher training. So clearly, like with the new era that we are in the world, a lot of that training will be in a different online format. And I can't give you necessarily a certain number of hours, but within 1 hour, a teacher would be able to administer the assessment, but there would be many hours of training and support after that for teachers to understand how to use the measures and how to access them within the platform. And that's also not any different than training and support that would be, or that was a part of Ames Web Plus and would have been continuing. So those, like that training and support would be ongoing.
So is this a 3-year agreement we would do and then reevaluate at the end of 3 years, or how does that work? How much time?
The contract is actually just a year at a time.
How long do you think it's going to take us to understand how this is working and to really correctly evaluate the process? Are we going to do it at the end of 1 year? I would assume it takes more than 1 year to actually get through this.
Yes, I mean, I think there's different levels of like evaluating its effectiveness. So, like there's the part of, are we getting the information about our students that we need that might be more easy to see earlier on. And then other measures about, how teachers are using it and like what their comfort level is, what their expertise level is, that would come in years 2 and 3 even. So having been a part of in changing an assessment platform in a previous district, I would say that the whole process is probably 3 years before it's really solid and well utilized.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Okay, then we'll move on.
Michael has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't
But
see.
she's muted.
Sorry, Michael.
Jeez. Michael, you're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. Just to clarify, how were the people who served on the committee? Did they volunteer? Did you have a selection process just in terms of stakeholder input? So it's not just to get a sense of, how much teacher input there was.
Sure. So because I'm relatively new to the district, I asked principals to give me some input for people who might participate, as well as directors at the DSC. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, did I miss anyone? Okay, then we'll move on to the district budget. Is that Julie? It's a group.
It's a group. It's the whole group. Just
Mary.
before I start that, Chrislyn, thank you for the presentation, and we will bring that forward on May 4th for board approval. So if you've got any other questions between now and then, just you can reach out to me or to Chrislyn, and we can get you connected with that. In terms of the budget, thank you very much, board members. I'll kick things off, and Julie and Jim and Jeff all have pieces of this as well. So we'll go ahead and go through it. as we continue that budget discussion. As you know, we work to align our resources with our strategic plan and have continued to work through that process. And tonight, we've come back to you after some direction that the board provided at the April 13th board meeting and study session, and we'll look at those revisions to the recommendations and answer any questions that you have as we prepare for action on May 4th. I'll let Julie take it from here.
We had some questions. Good evening, everyone. We had some questions at our last study session, a little bit about our funds and how that all works. And I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of just a snapshot slide to say, here's what these funds entail. And so we're just going to quickly go through them and just talk a little bit about them. And so we're just going to talk about the general fund. And tonight, our budget is simply about the general fund. That's mainly our general education and our special education. And then a lot of our restricted funds are included in the general fund as QComp, our capital budget, long-term facility maintenance, safe schools, targeted services, and student activities. Well, I talk about restricted funds a little bit because normally you can only code expenditures to restricted funds, like such as capital items. That's an easy one to talk about. QComp, just those expenditures related to QComp can be coded there because there's a restricted amount of money coming in, and the legislature wants to ensure that that's how we're spending our money is on those specific programs and services. And so majority of our general fund is what we call unassigned or unrestricted, you could also say. But that's mainly just our general education, our special education, transportation, those types of things. So, but there are some specialty items in there that we do have to account for separately. And then we also have our Fund 2, which is our child nutrition services. And and all of our costs associated with our child nutrition services comes from that fund. And just to talk a little bit about it, normally you can't transfer money out of child nutrition services into any other fund. You can only transfer money out of the general fund into any other fund. And even that is restricted at time for the most part. And so there isn't, they're pretty much just separate entities. Each and every one of these are separate. And then we have our community services fund, and that includes all of those services that they provide, our ECFE, our Kids Co program, our preschool screening, our preschool classes, our school readiness, all of those, all the classes and driver's ed that you hear about and the swimming programs, all of those come from our community services fund. And again, that's a separate fund. Typically, we can't transfer money out of community services into any other fund. Building construction fund, when we talk about our building construction, that's for any bond issues that happened, and that's what we're happening right now. So any money for the bond that was passed for all the building construction is in that fund, and it can only be used for that purpose. So that's not sitting in the general fund. However, what is in the general fund is the operating referendum. That is in the general fund as part of our general education. So I just want to make sure we're separating those two things out, that the building construction is in the construction fund, the operating referendum is in the general fund. And then we talk about the debt service fund. That is a special fund that is to pay off the debt. The money that goes in there is only to pay the debt for the construction. So that is not as part of our general fund. It is simply a separate fund as well, and it can only be used for that purpose. And then we have our internal service fund, and that is for our self-insured health insurance. It's health-insured dental, those, and our OPEB accounts. Those can only be utilized for those services as well. So can't transfer money out of those, can only use health insurance for health insurance. So they're very specific. And I want to make sure that people are understanding that there's very clear rules about how we can utilize those funds for any purpose. And so I just want to make that clear as we go through this process. I think sometimes it gets a little cloudy and people don't understand how we maneuver the money specifically for each of these funds and how that's utilize each of those funds. But I just wanted to kind of just to review that. Any questions about that?
Julie,
Otherwise,
could we
go
go
ahead.
through most of the rest of the presentation and then we'll
Mhm.
have questions? If
Okay,
people would
thank-
make notes if you have a question. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. As we go through, we kind of brought back a few slides just to talk about what we've talked about with the board in the past. And this is also what we had talked about with all of our buildings, is that the basic formula has not kept up with inflation. There definitely is a gap between what we receive and what the inflationary amount would have been if our gen ed formula would just simply be an inflationary amount every year instead of based on whatever the legislature decides. And so it is quite a gap of about a little over $1,300 per pupil. And so that's when you're seeing most of the time we're having to go back to our taxpayers and ask for additional revenue. It's because we're seeing that large gap there. Next slide, please. And then I also want to talk a little bit about our general fund revenues. This is based on last year's information. And you can see we are the fifth line over Prior Lake Savage, and we're comparing ourselves to most every other district surrounding us. We are definitely the least amount of revenue in state sources, which is the orange bar. And it's simply because we have low free and reduced lunch price applications, and so we don't get a lot of money in compensatory revenue. And so you'll see that we are getting less state aid than most of the surrounding districts. And so as other districts do, we try to make that up for in those local sources. So that's our blue bar above that. And you can see also, if you compare the blue portion of our line, that we are, besides Farmington, we're pretty much getting the least amount, or pretty much even with Farmington and Shakopee. Other than that, the green and the federal sources and other, you can hardly see the red because it's so little. But that's for sales or fees or whatever that may be. And so I brought this up because I want, we are making budget cuts, and I think some people think that there's a lot of things that we can be cutting. And the one thing I try to make sure that people understand is that we don't receive a lot of money. And so what we do receive, we try to spend as efficiently and effectively as we can. And you'll see that in the next slide of how we spend our funds. You can see it's on salaries and benefits, the gray and the pink. That's definitely our salaries and benefits. The next line is our purchase services. And those are things like our transportation costs and those types of things that we do to ensure that we can continue servicing our students. You can see the supplies and materials is very small in that light lavender color. And then our capital expenditures is very small as well. And we spend less than other districts. As you know, we've said for many years that we spend about $2,200 less than the other 7-county metro. I think this again shows that even our surrounding districts, that we spend less than other districts surrounding us because we receive less money. So there's not a lot of things for us to trim. It's difficult for us to do that because we just don't get as much money as other districts do. We want to go to the next slide. This is FY21, which means next year's operating referendum. So anybody who passed something this last fall, that was included in this. And so you can see what our operating referendum is and compared to other districts. And you can see that Shakopee doesn't have one. And I think if most of you look at this, you may be questioning and saying, why is our operating referendum 623? I thought it was 923. And if you recall, last year, the legislature moved $300 of our operating referendum into an account called local optional revenue, which is a levy. And so now by law, we show only the 623.97 as part of our operating referendum for next year. The remainder of that is part of our local optional revenue that the legislature told us that we needed to move things in that direction. I bring this up simply because I think this is one of the reasons that people think that we aren't upfront, and it's how come the numbers this year are 923 and all of a sudden next year they're 623, you're getting the same amount of money. And yes, we are, but it really is that legislative component that requires us to show these numbers the way they are. And again, we're one of the least amount of operating referendums in our surrounding areas as well. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the tech levy by district. And this is the latest information I have on this as well. We don't have a technology levy, neither does Farmington. The remaining surrounding districts have substantial amount more than we do for technology services that are available to them, simply because their voters agreed to pay for that. These are a lot of the reasons why we receive the least amount of revenue in the area.
Thanks, Julie, for providing that context. We thought that was important just to remind board members and to remind our public just kind of that big picture as we talk about the reduction and the budget adjustment process. Again, this slide hasn't changed. The major reasons for the budget shortfall that we have are that we have 200 less students, or received 200 less students than we had projected. Our state funding, as Julie just showed us, has not kept up with inflation. And then as we looked at those projected health insurance increases, that was about $1 million in additional expenditures. Go ahead, Martha. Thanks. Again, just about the guiding principles that we've used throughout the entire process. And the timeline, the next two slides show the timeline, I believe. Martha, if you want to go forward, please. And you can move right into the next one to see that we are now at April 27th, where we're bringing back some recommendations based on your direction, and then we'll seek board action on May 4th. So the parameters, and again, we wanted to bring this back. These have not changed from the beginning of the process. We want to ensure that that fund balance stays within our board policy. We've also talked from the very beginning about restoring class size ratios. And as we talked 2 weeks ago, I just want to be very, very clear that we did not change class size targets. Throughout this process, we've used the same targets that we always have. We constantly are looking at our staffing every year. Over the last year and a half, as Jim Quorum has come into the district, he has done a deeper dive with some of the staffing work that we've done. Last year focused more on the elementary. This year is focused on the elementary as well as secondary, and has worked really closely with Jeff and the teaching and learning team to look at programs, to look at how we schedule kids, to look at some of those staffing efficiencies, and to make sure mostly that that we're all in consensus and the numbers, everybody understands where those numbers come from. So as I've said before, this was a process that I would think the board would hope that the board would expect us to do every year to ensure that our staffing ratios, that we're taking a look at those and making decisions based on those. And then the third parameter is the open enrollment. The board made a decision in December on those numbers. So just wanted to remind you of those parameters. I think I'm back to Julie for a couple of slides.
So when we first started presenting to you, we brought forward this top portion that we would see an increased additional revenue of $3.2 million just by increasing the formula by 2% and enrollment by 125 students. Plus, we knew that we would get an additional 4% in special ed revenue. And we, the board had agreed to increase our achievement and integration revenue. But in addition to that, after doing some additional looking at what other options or other ways that we could increase our revenue. We have more students attending our MinCaps programs from Farmington School District, almost double the amount of students attending our MinCaps program. So we will see an additional $200,000 in revenue for those students attending from Farmington. That's the estimated amount based on those students. And then we did work quite closely with MDE about our special education revenue. This year is, and I've talked about this a little bit before, but this is a new base year. The legislature has changed again. The legislation is saying that this year will become the new base year for our special education revenue. And so by recoding some things, and our tuition used to come out of our state funds, and now we are changing that to that our tuition billing comes from federal funds. By doing that, we're able to show a higher amount of expenditures in special ed by moving the expenses that were in federal into state and not reducing our expenditures for tuition billing. And so we'll see an additional $400,000 in special education revenue. And so we're showing that we will receive an additional $600,000 than we originally projected from the February and March board meetings. These are the budget expenditures parameters that we had used to create our expenditure budget back in February and March. And that portion has not changed, but if we continue on to the next slide, these are the updated expenditure projections that our insurance rates went up only 8%. So that's a $300,000 that we anticipate that we're not spending, that we anticipated that we were going to be spending. We also went out for RFPs for our life insurance and long-term disability insurance, and we have a projected savings of $120,000 in that area as well. And our transportation, we had anticipated that we'd have about a 7% increase. That has been reduced to 2%, and so that savings is about $250,000. So those updated expenditures from our original projections is $670,000 less in expenditures.
Thanks, Julie. So as we came to you on April 13th, there were a couple of things that we clearly heard direction on, and then we heard some other discussion and considerations. So a couple of things that we clearly heard direction on was, first of all, we came forward with almost a $3.4 million adjustment, and we heard clear direction, keep it at $3 million. So we've come back tonight with that amount. And then we also heard clear direction on do not change the classroom targets, maintain the targets as you restore class size. And just a reminder, as I think Jonathan shared, was as we were talking about the classroom ratios, that he stated that, it's important that we use the same criteria when we hire staff that we also use then when we look at any adjustments that we have to make in staffing. And I'm just going to ask Jim to speak just a little bit more. You had some questions on that process, so I'm going to ask Jim just to speak a little bit more to the process and to those ratios.
Sure. I just wanted to walk through kind of our process, what our process is in relation to setting staffing levels each year. This process usually starts in February, where the four of us start talking about what that process for budget and staffing looks like. And then we start with principals, elementary in one group, secondary in another group. Usually start with elementary, and we'll meet with them to discuss changing demographics. In this, like for instance, this year, the number of kids in each building as students got moved around, changes in programs that are coming for the year, that sort of thing. And then we also begin to look and roll all the numbers forward for the next grade level, leaving kindergarten blank. And then as the kindergarten numbers become known, then we start adding those kindergarten numbers in. And I would say we meet multiple times with the principals, having discussions about programs and changes. It includes teaching and learning. It includes special education, and then the elementary principals. And we continue to do that until open enrollment numbers and IDT numbers come in, and then the principals and Julie's staff really drive that process of the assignment process for OEs and IDTs. Once that's done, then we have a pretty clear picture into March, early April, and we sort of draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we're going to use right now in order to set staffing. And then once that's done, we sit down with principals and they have recommendations. If it's a matter of reductions like this year, then because we didn't hit that class target before and we are now, then their recommendations on who those non-renewals should be, and we bring those forward. With secondary, it's a little bit different process because we will sit down and discuss with them, principals, teaching and learning, special education. We all sit down and talk about programming changes, as Terry has talked about, efficiencies in there. Are the programming going to change for next year, increase, decrease, that sort of thing. And we have that discussion, and then registration has to happen. Once registration's done, I think this year we had 3 or 4 meetings, teaching and learning, secondary principals, HR, and we went literally through every department and each program and talked about where they're heading with that, what's the nuances, what are what I call the yeah-buts that we're not aware of when it comes to staffing. So we get a really complete picture. If we say a class average of 32 in the high school or 30 in the middle school, everybody completely understands all the variables around that. And so that is our intent in order to get that done. And then we continue to do that and work towards getting to that, to those class averages of 30 and 32 at the secondary level. I would say that, this is a process that takes about 2 months. Principals, teaching and learning and SPED are part of that process every step of the way. We meet for hours on this to get to this point. And then we bring forward, based upon those class ratios, either increases, as you've done for the last 9-10 years, or in this case, decreases because of a bit of overstaffing. And so that's what came forward to you last time. I would say all the calculations here are only classroom teachers. So that's another thing that sometimes you hear, and I talked to that last time. It doesn't include gifted and talented, intervention, special education, dean, social workers, psychologists. It is truly just classroom teachers and those class ratios. So all the licensed support staff are not a part of this calculation. And then, once that happens and board action happens like it did the last board meeting, then we continue to look all through summer and see how those student numbers may change. There are times, I think last year we made a change in elementary numbers, a section in August, just when school was starting or had just started, just because of the students that showed up and a number of students in a grade level at a building. So that's really the process in a nutshell. And I think it's worked well to come up with these class ratios. Anything else?
And those are the numbers.
Yeah. So, and so as a result of that, this is what it ends up being as far as numbers in the elementary. And, one of the things that always happens is oftentimes, unfortunately, you can add and nobody is really aware of that. And that doesn't make quite the splash that this does, but it's necessary and has to come forward. And people have to know that we as administration, and I would assume you as a board, that feel that we sort of have this fiduciary responsibility around making sure that we are as efficient as we possibly can be when it comes to staffing. And sometimes that means a reduction.
Thanks, Jim. The next slide, the other pretty clear direction that we heard from the board on April 13th was a desire or questions around maintaining the technology integrationist as well as the elementary dean. So if you look at the next slide, as we looked to make those budget adjustments closer to the $3 million mark as directed, we also will have revised our recommendations to remove the previous recommendation of the teaching and learning restructure and instead maintain the 4 technology integrationist positions. In addition, to remove the recommendation to not fill the vacancy of the elementary dean position. If you look at the next slide, however, as we were reviewing the elementary dean position and as we were actually reviewing all of our extended contracts, we realized that our secondary deans do not have extended contracts, and our elementary deans do have a 15-day extended contract. We didn't think that that seemed right, that they weren't consistent. And because we're in the financial state that we are, we didn't have the desire to increase the secondary deans to those 15 days. So along with the recommendation to maintain the elementary dean positions, we are recommending that we reduce those extended contracts from 200 days as they currently are to 185 days so that they're consistent with the secondary dean positions. And there is a bit of a cost savings with that as well. The next slide then just shows the staff vacancy adjustments where we haven't included that elementary dean position, but continue to include the district naturalist, the peer coach, and the synergy position. And also with the administrative adjustments, that was another request that the board had that we look at that, and we did. We didn't do a deep dive comparable analysis, but we did look at many of the districts surrounding us, and we continue to come back to what our data has showed over the years is that administratively we are lean. And so the way that we would like to move forward with that administrative adjustment is to continue to work with administrators through the negotiation process. And we know that moving forward, as we look at future budget reductions or adjustments, that we're going to have to provide deeper comparables for board members to explore as well in the administrative area. There was no change to this either. Jeff, do you want to speak to this one?
No, I believe, as you mentioned, Dr. Stallo, this is the same information as the last at the last board meeting. One thing to point out here is the reduction, the adjustments that you're seeing here are due to a reduction of student IEP needs. Students either have left the district or are aging out or graduating, and so that's what these reductions are pertaining to relative to caseloads and students not needing that level of support. Certainly, as we go through the year, we always have students that may move in or out of the district, and if they move in, we evaluate the amount of need and support students may need from the standpoint of coming in, and then any additional staffing requests we always bring to the board for review and seeking additional requests throughout the course of the year. But as we are forecasting the start of the upcoming year, this is what we believe, based on the students we know are coming back, would be that special education adjustment. I'll just keep going if that's okay, Dr. Stallo. This is also similar to same information. Anticipate some energy efficiency savings, and then reducing supply and some technology budgets to achieve that level of savings.
Thanks, Jeff. So in summary, really, as we looked at the direction that the board provided to get us to closer to that $3 million mark, as well as direction around the positions, the technology integrationist positions and the dean positions, those really are the changes that we're bringing forward to you in this recommendation. Next slide, please.
We had some questions about, do we think that we will save some money with school being closed, or do we think that, where are we at? The legislature isn't completed their duties yet this year, and so we're still hoping for some additional funding there, possibly. However, we do know that we do have cost savings because we don't have substitute teachers, so that's about $200,000, and we're anticipating probably $50,000 in fuel costs savings, and that could be a little more. We only have data really for half a month for half of March right now, and so we'll be continuing to look at that and see what those savings will be. We do have some additional expenses. Both in technology costs. We definitely will be having additional costs for unemployment. How that works is that we are charged for unemployment for anybody who applies for unemployment, and the district has to, by law, levy for that. And so that's how that unemployment works. And so we'll have those costs now, and then we'll recoup that in later years. We also will be refunding fees for activities. That's $125,000. There's some other fees that we are looking at right now that for refunding back to parents. And then we definitely have a possibility of transferring money from the general fund to cover some costs in community education due during the executive order. We're still trying to determine exactly what that is. There's some confusion as to if you're receiving federal funds for community ed, which we do not, then that's when you can have to use the general fund to spend down those fund balances. So we're continuing to look into see what is the final determination for utilizing that or not. Either way, the general community ed doesn't have a large fund balance, and there are some fund balances like school readiness and ECFE that absolutely can't be utilized for that purpose. So we're looking at all of that, and we'll continue to work through that process as we get more information.
Thanks, Julie. A couple other follow-ups that we wanted to provide. There was somebody had asked about extended contracts, and that is something that we'll continue to explore. I talked a little bit already about the administrative adjustments. I know there were some questions with the district naturalist, and Jeff, I'm going to ask you, you did a nice job of reminding us of the origins of some of those funding sources.
So I guess the history of the district naturalist goes back several years. I think Chair Shimmick, you'd mentioned about grants in the past. And in the past, the Jeffers Foundation, which is a local group, contributed or donated to the district. And at one point, we had a district naturalist as well as an environmental education coordinator. And so we had a two-person staff. We had two staff members devoted to district naturalists, also environmental education, and then really kind of helped set the foundation for the district for environmental ed and the naturalist. And as times have went on, some of the funding sources from the Jeffers Foundation, they weren't able to contribute the amount that they had in the past. And so as a district, we were able to pick some of that up, but we also during several times had to right size, when we had money available to be able to continue that environmental education position, but not necessarily the naturalist. And then probably several years ago, it shifted to more of a curriculum specialist from a district naturalist environmental education when that donation from Jeffers Foundation was no longer granted to the school district. And then that curriculum specialist eventually evolved into someone else in the teaching and learning department. But ultimately, most recently, with our district naturalist, Three Rivers Park District approached us several years ago about providing a half-time naturalist if we would provide the other half. And at that time, with the funding, having the funding that we did, and where we're at with our budget, we were able to partner with them for a couple years to bring that naturalist on board. It was a great partnership. That's certainly something that we always are looking for as a district. But ultimately, Three Rivers District was not able to support that long term. And as a district, again, evaluated that position, evaluated from a budget standpoint, and has had that position in the district full time for I think the last 2 years, might be 3. And so the naturalist and the environmental education positions in the district have had a history of coming with partnership and using outside funding sources with that, or donations. Um, but as it ebbs and flows, and as those donations, sometimes those organizations are not able to keep up with those donations. As a district, we've always evaluated our ability to maintain that, continue that. But we've had some instances where, absent that funding source and just with the economics and the budget of the time, we've had that position go away for a little bit, but come back when we've had that opportunity. And so we do have part of this. The adjustment that we have is our current naturalist has submitted her resignation. And so it is something where, looking at an adjustment, we've had a long history of environmental education and district naturalists. We've got a lot of established relationships, and we're going to continue to train staff and continue that work on environmental ed, and our outdoor classrooms, and teachers committed to getting their kids outside. And so we're going to continue to focus on that work, and it'll have to be a collective effort that we keep paying attention to. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing that. I know there was also a question that somebody asked about, well, what about a change in the fund balance policy? So I'll just ask Julie to speak to that.
Yeah, we have talked quite a bit about our fund balance policy, and we've about 8 or 9 years ago, we changed it from a 5% fund balance, and I believe, and then it went to 8. And once it was above 8, it was something like that, then the board it was okay. And we kind of made it this 8 to 12%. I think in times like this is especially when we notice how important our fund balance policy is. When districts have a fund balance, these emergency times when unexpected things happen, we're able to continue our processes, our programs, and our procedures just like we have. When we don't have those funds, we're unable to do that, and we have to make some changes in those programs and processes. Right now, what they're looking at is to allow a delay in property taxes. As you know, we receive property taxes in May, and if we're not going to receive those property taxes, we have to look at our cash flow, and we have to determine whether or not we need to borrow money. And right now, I have looked at that, and we don't need to, based on our fund balance at this point. If that happens and the legislature were to shift funds, as they did back in 2012, 13, and 14, they shifted it from what it is currently. We receive 90% of our revenue in the current year and 10% from last year's kind of a cleanup payment. And they shifted it to 80-20, then 70-30, and then it went all the way down to 60-40. And it took the state a long time to pay those funds back to districts. And so a lot of districts were having to borrow money at that point. Our district did not have to borrow money during that time because we had a fund balance large enough to help us through that cash flow deficit. When we have to borrow money, it is an expense to the general fund. And so as we're already spending and trying to decrease our expenditures, adding another expenditure is difficult. And so, and especially when it's $100,000 or better in interest payments that we would probably need to pay. And as you recall, our monthly expenditures are almost $9 million. And so right now our fund balance is about 10 million. And so it's just slightly over a month that we have right now for our expenses. If we slide down there below that 8%, I'm pretty sure that our district would be looking at having to borrow money and having to have additional expenses in the general fund. And I think that's a really important piece of this, is simply because it's hard to say that it's necessary to cut staff, or cut a program or cut something else to pay an interest expense. And that's why it's so important to have these fund balances. And plus, just one more thing, certainly when we have a positive fund balance and it's in a good spot, whenever we are out for a referendum or anything, we get way better interest rates for any kind of bond issue that we have. And we certainly noticed that the last time that we were past those bond referendums. And so it really is a big boost to our local taxpayers as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. We also briefly talked 2 weeks ago. There was a question about technology levy, about the timing of that. And this is something that we definitely will want to continue having conversations about as we look at long-term strategies for increasing revenue. One of the major conversation actually that the commissioner and the governor have had over the last week is really looking at equitable distance learning and the struggles that several districts have because they don't have devices for students. They don't have access to internet. And, there's been a lot of conversation about, some districts who for years have supported technology levies are in a different place than other districts. And while we don't have a technology levy, I'm certainly grateful for the foresight of many of you who made decisions long ago to invest in technology and the infrastructure of our school district, in devices for our students and our staff, because otherwise I'm not sure where we would be right now. But this is definitely something, I think Julie spoke to it earlier, about as we look at our expenses. We're having a lot more and different wear and tear on our technology and use of our technology. So this is going to be something that we're going to have to look at. So as you go to the next slide, and we had talked about all of these before, some potential strategies moving forward. That technology levy is on there, as well as looking at an additional operating levy would be an option for us, maximizing to or doing our levy authority to the max, looking at our achievement and integration levy authority as well. And then looking at our fees, looking at our activities fees and our parking fees, and to make sure that we are gaining revenue in places like that we have ability to do so. So with that, the next slide just talks a little bit about next steps. We know that this conversation is going to continue. There's a lot of uncertainties right now, and Julie spoke to some of those. A lot of uncertainties with state funding, a lot of uncertainties with the economic impact of what we're going through right now. We'll continue to have on our budget. And we know that we want to be sure that we are in front of that and planning as efficiently as we can. We have many things that we explored that haven't come forward, and we will continue to explore those. We'll take a look at, well, we may not have answers this summer about what the legislature is going to do or where our enrollment is. There's different scenarios we can look at and continue to cost out and share with board members and get input from our staff about some of the other options that we've been looking at and will continue to look at. By September or October, then we're hoping to have the board approve budget parameters. So if we do need to make reductions, we'll have a more clear idea of what that amount is, but we'll begin or continue working on this even without knowing exactly what that amount may be. And then we'll be sure to have an inclusive process where we include stakeholders in that and begin to draft some recommendations in October, discuss those and get direction from board members throughout November. And then our goal would be for board approval of any reductions that we would have to make by December. So moving forward, that's just a little snapshot in broad terms about what that process will be as we move forward. So again, our goal was to come to you. There were a lot of things we talked about, but we heard pretty clear direction on the 3 million. We heard pretty clear direction on don't change the classroom targets on the ratio work that you're doing. Pretty clear direction on the technology integrationist and the elementary deans. And we've now brought back a package listening to that direction of $3 million in adjustments. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay, I think I'd like to ask everyone to speak first, and then we can continue discussion after everyone has a chance to speak. And I'll start with Jonathan if he's ready.
Always ready. Always ready. A couple of notes that I want to refer to. Thank you for listening and coming back to us with the things that we did talk about. I appreciate the fact that you added at the end that you recognize that there was some discussion and some requests for an additional dive in the administrative portion of this. There's not really any result of that at this time. Again, assuming that we may be going through a second wave, I think we all understand that we're going to need to everything will be on the table. From what I understand, and perhaps Dr. Salo or somebody could answer this question when I'm done speaking. From what I understand, one of your objectives, which was hoping that outside of the right sizing that we think would be happening, whether we were in a budget cut or not, and the special ed positions where the students requiring those needs are no longer going to be our students. It is my understanding that outside of those job losses, that with these proposals that we will not have to have anybody else lose a position. And I think that's important for us to state. I think that was a noble objective on the front end. I want to reiterate what Julie said about the fund balance and bond ratings. That is non-starter for me to be considering changing that policy. I think we need to stay there. I am also wondering, I want to confirm when we talked about our adjustment to our operating levy and showing where ours was now at the $600 and other districts at the higher number, do the other district numbers reflect that reduction as well? And I see Julie shaking her head yes.
Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, tying two topics from tonight together, Chrislyn was saying we are going to be saving some money with the changes to FastBridge. Have we taken that into account here, or has that not happened yet because we haven't voted on it? But I'm trying to get a handle on the dollars there. It seems to me if that's roughly 2/3 of our students who take those tests, and we're saving $8-10 a piece, that's a nice chunk of savings. So Jeff has his hand up.
Yeah.
Part of the plan that we have in place is a bit of a crossover. So we anticipate we will have a bridge of where we'll have to have some map testing available, more so, not as much as we have right now, but certainly FastBridge. And so there's going to be a bit of crossover while we make the transition to FastBridge. There will be a cost savings, but it's going to be more in subsequent school years. The other thing we have to look at too is that with map testing being grades 2 through 8, you have Ames Web Plus for primary, plus we're looking at middle school and high school. We are going to be having more kids have access to FastBridge from the SEL standpoint. And so roughly we're going to see some savings, but in that crossover and in the training, which is certainly out of professional development, we want to make sure we do it well. We want to make sure we do it right. I would project a small cost savings, but it will be more, we'll have a better understanding of the true achieved cost savings for the following year after we implement this for next year and then looking into the following school year and the following budget. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess my last comment would be I think we all anticipate that this is a first wave. We're going to be doing this again. And I do like the comment made at the end of the presentation about a different process, perhaps a more robust process. I would describe, to me, the ideal scenario would be top down from the standpoint that we as a board should be establishing our priorities and identifying the things that the values that we want to make sure those decisions are based upon. And then I'd love to see things happen much more on a bottom up process where we go out to buildings and staff and allow people to have a lot of input on, because this is going to affect them, and allow them to have a lot of input on how that would get executed. That's all that I have.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Melissa?
Thanks, Lee. Quick, as I look back at slide number 28, if you could give me the total FTE reduction for the teaching staff. That would include both positions not filled and those that are planned to depart under this plan. I didn't get that number.
Can you share which,
Yeah.
Martha, would you be able to go back to the slide, please? And which number is it? Page 28 in the board packet is the timeline. Would you be able, Melissa, to share with us what it says at the top of is it this one here, or class size ratio?
Sure, the summary of recommended adjustments, where it shows the 3 million. It's farther toward the end.
Yeah, I think it's
It's
closer.
right after operational adjustments. There you go.
Very good.
So what's the total FTE that we're looking to have as reductions in this budget?
So are you asking licensed teacher FTEs or?
Right.
Okay.
Teaching staff, so including naturalists and
Add them up.
people.
Well, you have 10.5 on the restore classroom ratios. Looking then at staff vacancies, you got 1.0 district naturalist position, 1.0 peer coach position, and a 0.67 synergy. You're looking at approximately 5 FTE in SPED, and I'm adding those top 3 bullet points. And then the reduction in paraprofessional support depends on student, but that's not licensed teacher support.
Right.
Would you concur, Jim? Did I
Well,
miss
actually,
anybody?
on the special education one, yeah, on the special education slide, the one-to-one nurse is not part of the
Correct.
teacher bargaining unit, nor are the sign language interpreters. So you would just have the 2. Yeah.
So that would be less.
Right.
So it would be 2 FTE in special education.
Correct.
Okay, so a total of 17? I didn't write them all down here.
I believe it's 15.17.
I'm sorry, you cut out?
I believe that total amount that they just mentioned is 15.17.
Perfect. There's a few departments and areas that I don't recall having been shared with the board for cost reductions. I know last time we talked about outside consultants, but I know the HR department, Jim's area, we've got 5 staff there. Business services, Julie Sink, I don't know how many staff you have in your area total.
Well, if you include all of the MARS, accounts payable, payroll, it's 8.
Have those 13 positions been on the table?
Yes, they have been discussed.
But it did make it up to the board, though. Because I think it's the first time we've looked at those areas. What about upper management salary reductions? I know statewide companies are doing that. I know Terry had thrown out, and she's got budgeted in there her third year not having the salary increase. But what about other upper management areas for salary reductions?
That would all have to be negotiated, which we're going into negotiation year.
Okay. And then walk us through too what it would look like. Obviously, we've got 200 fewer students than what we projected. We're trying to avoid potential delays in property taxes. That's new information that I didn't know about, that could be pending up here. Also, we want to obviously avoid any sort of borrowing of dollars, if to help us float through here. There's an option that the community has talked a little bit about, which should be on the table, and that is delaying the opening of the new elementary school by 12 months. If you think about all the things we've got in our budget, we've got additional transportation costs, additional building maintenance costs, additional custodial costs, support staff, and additional teachers for that building. Walk us through what that would look like.
We actually do not have additional administration there, secretary staff, nor do we have additional teaching staff for that building. The only things that we would have new in that building are the custodial staff, utility costs, because we're simply moving the Ola del Lago out of Edgewood and putting that in Glendale or Greenwood. And then, so we have the same amount of administrators, we have the same amount of teachers, they're just being dispersed among those elementary buildings. So yes, we will have some additional utility costs, but we're actually looking at ways to reduce those costs district-wide. And I think Jim's really looking into ways with the new, he can speak to it better than I can, but with the new electronic systems that we have, they're really looking at ways to utilize and benefit the district in terms of cost savings there. And it would simply be those costs of custodians to maintain those buildings. And so, I mean, that would be a discussion now, absolutely by the board, but I think otherwise, most of those costs are, we already currently have.
And that was as a result of the operating levy that was approved with the building bond, correct, Julie?
Yes, that is correct. That we have accounted for those costs as part of that.
Well, I know we've hired extra staff. I remember doing that just 2 or 3 months ago in preparation for the building opening. I mean, everything's got to be on the table.
Are you referencing?
Jeff, did you ask a question? It didn't come through.
I didn't understand what staff are you referencing, Melissa, that we could go back and look at that were hired in anticipation of opening the building?
I remember building maintenance staff, custodial staff that we approved about 3 months ago.
Yes.
Those are the 3 additional staff for
Yep.
custodial and
Can I add to that?
yes.
Thank you, Board Chair, Chair Simic. So we have been adding custodians all along. We have not hired yet custodians for Hamilton Ridge or part of the high school total. But we're waiting until those spaces come online, and that's the time we hire.
So Jim, the other operations and maintenance staff that we hired is due to the other additions in the square footage we've added through the referendum and opening those new spaces, correct?
That is correct. We still have a balance of Red Tail Ridge, or I'm sorry, Hamilton Ridge and high school yet, because we're not open. We're not fully open in either one of those sites.
Thank you.
That's all I have. It just seems like we could have some more adjustments in some of our district service offices. If we're not going to close an elementary, we gotta be lean. I mean, we could end up next September, October. They're talking, flu starts back. This pandemic could be worse. Come late fall, we end up closing again. We don't have buildings open. It's an opportunity to save some money. But I think we need to look more at the positions in the office before we cut additional teaching learning staff. That's all I have.
Thank you, Melissa. I'll move on to Mary. Over there. Okay.
Hi, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I know this process has been very painful for everyone. And certainly for the morale of the staff that we are talking about here that are going to be cut. But I want to go back to a couple things, and I'm just going to, I'm sure that some of these answers are going to overlap. But first of all, in the March 16th study session, what stuck out in my mind was, I believe, Julie, you said that we overspent $4 million in anticipation of additional enrollment, if I understood that correctly. Is that correct?
No. We last year, or for the current year budget, so it's hard because I'm already a year ahead now. Last year at this time, when the board decided to approve the budget and when we brought forward the budget, we had some of these additional costs in the budget for opening, like some of the additional staffing that we needed when opening these buildings, like the custodians and those kinds of things, to help us with moving and cleaning and some of those things. We hired them early, and so some of those expenses came early. And then on top of that, we were anticipating 250 students, and we were hiring the staff for those 250 students coming into the district. So that's how that expenditure of that 4 million came about, Mary.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I do want to kind of go back in hindsight, knowing what we know now. Is there an idea of what we should have added to the ops levy, or what we should have done with the tech levy in 2017 and or 2016? Because I believe the amounts were about the same. And how can we actually make up for that now? Because I do anticipate, as was alluded to the last time, that we're probably going to have to go through additional cuts as things go forward. Hopefully we won't have a relapse of what's going on, but I do want to explore as soon as possible the options of maybe what we should have put into the ops levy and what we can do now, and potentially adding a tech levy. And I'm doing that with the full recognition that economically we're not doing that well. But, I also do it with future wise. If we don't take action, or at least attempt to take action in that area, we may not be setting ourselves up for success after we get out of this. So I'm not sure if you have any input onto that, of what the ops levy maybe in hindsight should have been, or what it should be now.
I think when we relooked at the operating levy that we went for was that additional $250. That was after one failed levy, tech levy request, along with the building bond. I think we were looking at what we could pass and the max that we could ask for at that time, and felt like what we could ask for was to open the buildings and not for additional staffing necessarily above and beyond that. So we did have we knew we had some technology needs and those types of things as part of that to make sure that we were staffing across all of our buildings. But outside of that, that's really what we were looking at the time. So as a balancing act, should we? I think we were looking at the time, we could have went for even more money, and we talked about it at the time and said, what do we think we can pass? And that's why we landed at that number. I certainly, I think all of us, if we thought we could have gone for 300 or 350, we certainly would have been recommending that. Again, we've been living, and I'm going to say that in a general term, or trying to budget based on additional enrollment all of these years. And so that is why our operating referendum is so low. In addition to, it is a burden on our taxpayers. We don't have a lot of industry in the district. And so that does have a big effect on how much it costs our homeowners for school levy and taxes.
Okay.
And we did, Mary, we did talk about a tech levy at that time too, and just, didn't feel that would be supported with the bonds and an additional operating. But we certainly talked about that and analyzed the dollars and what we thought that need would be. And just again, to Julie's point, really looked at the survey data about what we thought that our community would support. And that's why we didn't at that time go for a tech levy either.
Okay. I would prefer that we actually look at that, even though the timing is probably not ideal. I think we're much better off going for the right number and what we really need to support the type of learning we want to provide our students, rather than continuing to cut. And I, for one, am not in favor of increasing or readjusting class sizes. Like I said, we do have a lot of electives and not everything is equal, but my experience walking through the schools and seeing the size of the core classes, they're pretty large. And we have seen an increase in the number, in the amount of kids needing extra help. And of course, with the reduction in staff, we are looking at potentially a reduction in support staff. So if you have a large class size, then it helps to have support staff in there, particularly for elementary and middle school. But if we cut that too, we're really, in my opinion, cutting off the teachers at the knees. And I think they've already been stressed, and I would like to see us avoid that at all costs if we can. And look at everything being on the table. In that light, I've got a couple more questions, and that's, we talked, we've had a lot of lessons learned with the devices for students, and we do spend a lot of money on Apple products. I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can look at starting to switch out some of the technology we use to more cost-effective technology, if that's even possible. Again, I'm not in the weeds with what the tech integrationists have to deal with and what's working and what isn't working. But I do know that in general, the Apple products tend to be a little bit more expensive, and not sometimes a lot more expensive. And we'd have to balance that with the educational capabilities and the software that's actually available per vendor. But I do know there are some schools that are moving away from that for that reason, and I'd like to see that investigated. I'm sure that, based upon the student populations that we have, we are dealing with potentially millions of dollars there, but not quite sure where those millions actually land if we actually end up having to reinvest that into different software programs. When we're talking about comparative school districts and things like that, there are other school districts that certainly didn't go into a pandemic with a budget consideration. But the biggest difference between those is that tech and ops levy. They did have that extra money coming in. even in even in areas that don't have industry, and even areas that do. They tend to also have a potential higher number of free and reduced lunch. They tend to have a higher number of and spend, of course, when you look at something comparing us to Rosemont, I mean, they spend a good, I don't know, at least $1,000 extra specifically in the area of special ed and regular instruction, but they do have a much more diverse, student population where that's needed. So we aren't able, I don't think anytime we compare ourselves to other school districts, we're able to compare apples to apples. So I don't want to use that as a crutch to say, hey, everybody else is in the same boat, because they're not all there. And some of them aren't there at all. So we just have to really focus on ourselves and what we can move forward with. But again, I haven't changed my opinion. I do believe that cutting staff, particularly essential workers, when it comes to the students and support staff, that would still be my very last option, because they are essential. And I know that just coming into this year and the last couple of years, they've been stressed and stretched. And this e-learning process, I believe that there's people out there that have done nothing less than heroics. So I don't want to make the situation more stressful going into the following year. As far as some of last time we specifically talked about the deaf and hard of hearing, I believe, because we are losing some kids that we needed those extra personnel for. And we're not, as far as I know, we're not anticipating more. So those were some of the personnel that were going to be furloughed or not needed for the following year. Is that a correct assumption?
So the students that the sign language interpreters are directly working with, it is in their IEP that they have an interpreter. I believe those students are leaving our district next year. So we do not have other students with similar or the same IEP needs for sign language interpreters for them.
If we do, yeah, that is correct. Okay. If we do, and if we run into that situation, do we have the opportunity to reevaluate our relationship? I know that there's some language in the state statute, et cetera, that's been reinterpreted, but do we have the ability to reevaluate our relationship, let's say with the Southwest Metro or with other districts and services where we can depend on them more, maybe in order to share the cost burden and still help the students?
Always. That's why we have a partnership with District 288, being able to partner and find opportunities, collaborate on needs. And I mean, that's part of the work of a consortium. So yes, that is something I know, Dr. Stallo, you might be able to speak to more, but I know when you guys have meetings, superintendents, they're having meetings and they're always looking for opportunities or student needs where they can share staff, because that is a benefit to all districts and it helps to serve student needs. So
would that help us cost wise though? Would that, I mean, if we shared a little bit more of our burden?
It helps address the need for students, but sometimes too, other districts may not have those needs. And so there's not a partner. And so sometimes as a district, we have to make those decisions alone in order to provide for students who are on the IEPs. So before you get too far along, I do want to circle back and speak directly to some of your technology questions or assertions, because I think I can speak to that.
Okay, please do.
So you brought up the question about looking at devices and reviewing devices, and every decision that we've done as a district when it's come to iPads, we went through a review process. When it came to iPads, we did a comparison with Microsoft products and other tablets at the time. And as our district recommendation went to look at iPads, given the app structure and the ability of what students could do with the iPads, That was a recommendation that also came through the board at that time. But that was a few years ago, and that was before your time. Our most recent comparison project that we went through was on the MacBook Airs for staff, the staff laptops, which quite frankly has been really a game changer for our staff, doing tremendous things, working with students during the distance learning component. Very similarly, we did a cost analysis and received quotes from our Apple reps as well as from PC, and we looked at both products. The prices were comparable. Looking in between as far as the choice of whether we use Apple for MacBooks or looking at a PC laptops. The costs were comparable and the terms were comparable for both devices. What really tipped the scale in terms of the MacBook Airs was Apple's ability to better be able to be managed and supported on the backside.
Mhm.
Similar in our district, we do not have a very robust technology department. And so the ability to manage the devices on the backside and using some of those enterprise products, which I know Mr. Milazzo could speak to a lot better than I can right now, but being able to manage those devices, update those devices, Apple was a much better match for the support that we could provide our stakeholders as well as our staff, and not allow us to have to come back with additional staffing costs to support the PC device. So we've done those comparables. Every decision we make when it comes to devices, when it comes to the costs, and it comes to supporting, we do that very thoroughly. And I believe that also came to the board for review as well with the contract.
I just remember the iPads, but I'm glad you looked at it, and I'd like to maybe take it offline and discuss that more if that's a possibility. But I was just bringing it up to make sure that those types of questions were on the table. And then my last question, certainly not
I'm
my
sorry,
least one.
One more.
Pardon me? Okay.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is really it's something that I think we've all been involved with. But our students are not just dependent on iPads. Currently, that's been the device that we've deployed to students, but we also have quite a few Chromebooks, and our students at all levels have access to Chromebook technology as well. You know, as we look to your point about distance learning next year, and looking at if this is something that continues to evolve, we're already actively looking at our Chromebooks part of our solution for helping students and matching what students need to learn. And in some cases, is the Chromebook a better tool to match the learning relative to the iPad, or both? And so we do have Chromebooks. We are in the process of looking at that in the future moving forward. But once students come back to school, they have the option, teachers have the option of Chromebooks and iPads to use with their students.
Okay.
So that's my last thing on technology. I apologize, Mary, for interrupting you.
No, that's fine. Thanks for the added information. I was wondering if there's any change or any thought to cost savings with regards to Greenwood. We were still, I believe, in the process of converting Greenwood to move community ed over there. We do have potentially extra space depending on what the fate of community ed is now that who knows what's going to happen next year. I'm not sure if there's added savings, use of that space to maybe reduce the stress on certain student populations, or has that been considered?
I can jump in on this one as well, and Jim Delwell, if I miss anything, please let me know. But I know the scope of the work of Greenwood has been bid out, and so that work is proceeding forward, and quite much more at a rapid pace, given that students and staff are not accessing the building right now during distance learning. As far as community education, the transfer over to that space that was going to be a gradual transition. We were not looking at that as a transition to start the school year, but perhaps later in the fall once the school year got up and running. And so certainly with community education, the way things are at right now, we're going to have to look at the programming. I mean, our intent always is to restore programs for our stakeholders and our students. I would anticipate, I think we all anticipate it's going to take some time. But they're going to need space in order to provide community programs to stakeholders. And the space at Grainwood that they've designed will allow them to do that once they start up again, and then once they start to offer program options for the community. That I think one of the most challenging things that they've had in previous years is most recently we've lacked the space as a district to be able to offer classes and offerings during the school day because we've been out of space. One of the benefits of community education over at Grainwood with their office is they'll have classroom spaces during the day as well as in the evening, so that they can offer a more options that appeal to different stakeholder groups during the day. And that, I think, will help allow them to get their program up and running, and also offer things that they haven't been able to offer in several years because of the lack of space.
Okay. Well, I wasn't sure what the future plans were, and given the uncertainty of the times, I didn't know if those plans had changed, if there was some cost savings to be made. But overall, I will restate that I am not a fan of larger class sizes by any stretch. I have heard nothing but the fact that we have been short paras for years, and the fact that those two areas are going to be hit in this. I'd like us to continue to put every option on the table to prevent that from happening. And of course, including going back to the taxpayers with additional levies, if possible.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Enrique?
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been a riveting discussion so far. It's a very, very challenging time that we have right now. We have lots of uncertainty about the growth of our district and how things will shape up, not just for this next school year, but even beyond that. Uncertainty around what resources and what revenue and where those funds will come from. As it's already been said, we don't have a lot of industry. It's primarily residential. That's what we have, and it's our community that needs to help lift us up. Anybody who's following Governor Walz's statements and his press conferences, we know that we are going to be facing a substantial deficit at the state level. I believe the last number I saw was 20 to 30 billion with a B. So that has a trickle-down effect on what programs and what funding is going to be available for business as well as education for individual and industry. So all of that just has to weigh heavily throughout this entire process. And that's where I really struggle with looking at making decisions or making cuts in the classroom or even close to the classroom. That's very challenging when we know that there's so much uncertainty, so much need. Looking at the special education focus, I know that's focused, well, unless I'm incorrect, please correct me if I'm wrong, focused on those who have IEPs, but I didn't hear any mention of any of the students who might have 508 plans or other dispensations that require that additional level of support. I know not all learners are created equal. Not all educators are created equal either. So somebody who has quite a bit of experience, a lot of exposure, might be able to handle a larger classroom that has a mix of IEP plus 508 plus other students that may or may not have some of those additional needs. Another teacher with the same level of experience may not have the right set of skills to bring into that situation to be able to succeed, which means that that would create potentially a situation where those learners aren't in a position to reach their full potential as part of our vision statement. So that has me kind of twisted, just thinking through that as we look through not only the recommendations for special education, but also recommendations on the staff side. So I just want to make sure that we're very intentional before even recommending any staffing cuts, that we're looking at what exactly is it that we have, in addition to who do we have, what's the talent that we have in place, so that we can not only be successful, but make sure that our learners are successful. And then I'll be quiet for right now so Jeff can answer.
Yes, Jeff has something to say.
That's a the thing you're talking about is absolutely key critical, and I think that's what I've taken away over the last several weeks is the importance of teacher support for sure, for certain, when you're talking about budget reductions and you're talking about keeping the cuts away from the classroom as much as possible. On the points of staff having professional expertise, certainly you gain expertise from experience, but you also gain expertise through the professional development, mentoring, and coaching. Um, on the 504 plan, which is accommodations, as well as the IEPs, our special education department, they do provide support to teachers, strategies to teachers. We have a teacher on special assignment in special education that also works hand in hand with teachers on accommodations, as well as our assistant directors, and then also in student support services as well. Again, providing coaching, providing um, recommendations, providing family support as well. I think the one thing is to say a classroom teacher knows all. They know a tremendous amount, but everybody has to have that support system around them. And I think that's the important part of what we do is that the support system for helping staff improve their professional practice on curriculum, mental health. Um, we always have work to do in those areas, but it requires a lot of support for staff and parents and students, and we're going to continue doing that. And we've got our teachers on special assignment that do that. We've got administrators that do that. Our building principals are hands-on with 504 plans. Our assistant principals, again, providing support and all the way through. And again, we're going to do what we have in this adjustment for you still keeps those resources intact. As we move forward and as we really start talking about as the cuts, if they do get deeper, and as I think what you mentioned, if the state revenue if the state is certainly collecting less revenues now, and that's going to impact school funding, the cuts are going to get deeper, and that's just that unfortunate reality. And I think to what we have in the presentation, coming out of this and really start going into some of those longer term solutions or projections, as well as what are those other revenues, are there things that we should be doing differently, because a key part of how we budget, and you all know this, is how we set our parameters. And one of the parameters I think we want to engage with you and a board with this summer is what do we think we're going to get for state funding. And I know in the past it's been relatively consistent. I just don't know from the state, really, as we move forward, if we can bank on that 2% a year over the next several years. And that will come out more. But I guess to the essence of your question, we're going to continue to support teachers in helping with kids that have 504 plans, accommodations, support parents in working with their students as well on the home front and mental health services too. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff.
Did you have more, Enrique?
I do. One other question, hopefully not nearly as long. So we're just kind of thinking on strategic direction. So Thank you, Dr. Stallo, for sharing the updates on kind of the change in direction on the technology integrationists. So with removing those 4 FTE off of the potential reduction list, what impact does that necessarily have on the overall direction? Because it was going to be a reduction of 4 technologists and replacement with 2 other administrator positions. So what does that look like? What kinds of things are we going to have to augment, or potentially strategic initiatives that we're not going to be able to move forward on with this change?
Well, I think I'll start, but then I'll invite Jeff to come in as well. You know, what we heard, and again, none of us could have predicted what happened between our initial recommendation to the board and where we were on April 13th. And we had given, you know, some context about the positions of the technology integrationist, and from the beginning of the plan that the district had, in terms of, let's build the infrastructure, let's get devices, let's make sure that we have support and staff who can support the integration for students and for staff with technology. And we were in a position where we felt that we had achieved and built a lot of the capacity, and have teachers and staff all over the district who have some amazing expertise with integrating of technology. So the shift, I think, and Jeff, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the shift that we were recommending originally was to offset the 4 technology integrationist positions, and really look at leadership in the areas of English and mathematics. Again, those are places where we're continuing to work on a instructional excellence framework aligned to standards, and help support the pedagogy of our teachers, but also, you know, having folks that were dedicated to that. What we have, and Jeff shared a great example of this last time, is, you know, we certainly have content expertise and technology expertise with some of our technology integrationists. And I'm making some assumptions that will continue to deepen that work, so that your question about impact with strategic directions, we still have to improve our reading outcomes and our math outcomes across the district. And that will continue to be work that our administrators do, our peer coaches support. We've got teacher teams, ELA teacher teams, and math leadership teams that will continue to do that work. And at least in the math leadership, we have technology integrationists who also help lead that work. So I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add to that?
I think the only thing I referenced last time is that transition of helping content area expertise that has started. All 4 of our tech integration specialists, their jobs are above and beyond technology. They certainly are helping with software and devices, but you know, we're going to have them continue to do that. They're wonderfully talented people, and they're certainly staff in good standing, and they're definitely appreciated. So we're, you know, their role is going to continue, and certainly with distance learning, all the things that they've trained staff on with devices and software. You know, when everybody is working remotely and kids are remote and families are remote, that definitely swung the pendulum back to the integration front. And anybody who's hesitant with technology over the last 6 weeks, the Band-Aid has certainly been ripped off. And so we're going to continue to support those families and kids and staff members. And we're also going to start getting into more content area expertise and, you know, assessment, and looking at how do we gauge assessment and student progress and student growth when they're not in a classroom with their peers, and a teacher's having, you know, more traditional formats to assess them. So the role will continue to evolve. The role of the teacher is going to continue to evolve during this. And earlier today, you know, I was meeting with my department, my team, and you know, they were saying, well, you know, there's best practice, but really in distance learning, we don't have best practice yet because it hasn't really gone on long enough. We really have promising practice. You know, what are those promising practices? And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is identifying those promising practices and identifying what teachers need in order to be supported to keep doing what they're doing.
Enrique, do you have anything else?
Thank you. No, I don't have any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Enrique. Michael?
Thank you. A few notes listening to both the presentations and the comments. First of all, I feel like for the most part, this was a successful stream of back and forth and communication of stakeholders, the different proposals that have come forth. And then I know prior to the last study and board meeting, I'm sure many other board members had this too, but I spent a lot of time listening to stakeholders who had concerns. I heard loud and clear about tech integrationists, and I heard loud and clear about the dean. Not every teacher I spoke to agreed, but I would say the majority of the people that I spent time talking to and the emails we received, that came out strongly. And I feel like the admin team was really receptive to that. So I want to thank both the people who gave that input and the fact that you were willing to take that feedback back and come back to us with this proposal. I want to reiterate what Jonathan said, and that was that outside of restoring class ratios and not filling vacancies, that we are not dismissing anybody in the midst of a pandemic when there's so much, fiscal uncertainty for not only our district, but the people who are employed by our district. So I want to keep that perspective. In terms of class sizes, I think that going forward through this, if we as a board want to talk to the admin team about looking at different class ratios, we can do that. I don't think we can change it prior to a board discussion. So if this is what's been working for years and we are no longer comfortable with that, then I think those are separate discussions we should have prior to a new budget discussion. Nobody's in favor of larger class sizes. We're talking about going to the ones the board has approved for years. So if we want to change that, I think we should put that on the docket for future discussion. The same with special ed and pairs. I hear that need from teachers over and over as well. I think that as a board, if we're going to need to look at that down the road, then we have to get more information on that and talk to more people in those departments so that we do provide the supports, but we got to listen to those stakeholders. So those, I think this whole process has been really helpful to me to say, what are the issues that continue to come up at our board table and when stakeholders call? And what do we need to discuss a little in a deeper way prior to our next budget discussions? In terms of a referendum or going back out for a tech levy, I certainly would consider that discussion as well. A couple of things. I was not a board member for the last two referendum. I was on the referendum committee for the first failed one and joined late in the effort for the most recent one. My concerns are that not even the whole board agreed last time that we should go out for a referendum. It was a 5-2 vote. So I just want to be sure that we're really cohesive if we're going to go out, that we are speaking with one voice. Secondly, I, in getting involved last time, went to some meetings hosted by people who were against the referendum. And there's some really, in terms of coming back to the community and asking for more tax money, there's some really stern voices in the way that information is shared or misshared. So I just want to be really savvy about how we would do that ask and involve the community like we did before. So I certainly would entertain that. I would just want to be really thoughtful in that process before we go forward. And then Hamilton Ridge, I was on the receiving end when Red Tail didn't open. Our kids were assigned to go there, and Red Tail sat for a year. Thank you, Melissa, for asking the question, and then admin team for answering for us so we had a better sense of what those expenses are that we're looking at. In terms of our community and our teaching staff, another concern I would have if we let it sit for a year is that we've reshifted boundaries and bus routes and went through all of that with our community. And then we asked teachers to be willing to pick up and build new learning teams and dig in with their new administrators and get prepared for the school year. So I feel like that impact is not just financial, but it's our relationships. And so I just want to keep that in mind too, if we have those discussions. Also, I consider that kind of the part of the taxpayer approved money. We got money to do those things when we had our referendum approved. So I guess that was my main points. I just thank you for listening. I'm comfortable that we're doing the best we can. And some of these issues that come up again and again, I think we should discuss them before we get this close to the next end of the budget. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Stacy?
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate you coming back. I think the areas that were discussed, where there was consensus around the tech integrationists and the dean, I concur with that based on our discussion. One question I had, Julie, and I can't remember this. I know we're not at the full level, and I apologize for not asking this earlier, but I thought of it as you were doing the presentation. The achievement and integration levy, we're not at our top there, are we?
No, we're at half.
Half is like 300 or something like that?
We're at 400 and our maximum right now is 800,000. And just as a reminder that that's not all levy, it is state aid as well. And so.
Oh, it is.
Yes, absolutely.
So
So
it's not all based on the taxpayers.
in fact, the majority of it is aid.
Oh, okay. That's helpful.
Yes.
So we have some room there in the future is what I'm getting at basically. I think, for me, like I said, I appreciate the consensus. I think this work is, the kind of stuff that I did not really dream about doing when I decided to re-up for the school board. It's nothing that anyone wants to do. And so, I appreciate the fact that, and I'll just reiterate, I think what Jonathan started out saying, the fact that we won't have people, going to losing their positions with this adjustment. I would reiterate and kind of discuss too in the future, like where we talked about, let's just say the naturalist position with going forward. And I'm glad to see that schedule. And I would really like us to stick really close to that schedule. I think it's important for us in the future here in the next 6 months to have some really robust discussion as a board as to who we are as a district, as based on our strategic plan, where we're going, what we can do with the amount of dollars we have, and to really have those discussions, whether it be, as some of the other board members talked about, additional levies, and just, what can we be with who we are. I've been doing and been involved, obviously, with the school board for a long time, and with levy campaigns and things. And I do know we run a lean ship as far as administration. So any cut we get is very impactful. And so when it comes time to do this kind of work, it's really difficult. And so I think for me, the process going forward is I would just reiterate stakeholder input and really, us giving a voice to everybody. And really, when we're doing informational things as far as to staff and community, because I feel this is going to be a fairly robust process the next go around, that we allow time for people to digest what information we're giving them, what they have for input, that there's a feedback loop that gives them time, not something that's presented quickly and you have to turn around and do it, in a couple days. I think we need to be really considerate of people's time and giving them time to digest, because we do want really authentic stakeholder input going forward. And so for me, I think that's going to be a big part of it. And then also just bringing the board along the way, just as far as, okay, these are the areas we're looking at. This is why, this is where we're at, and just a little bit more feedback along the way. I think the sooner we start, the better. I know that there's going to be a lot of ifs as far as legislature and where we're at. But it's a crazy world right now. And I think, we're going to have to do the best we can with what we can do for planning. And I think we always have as a district, really taken a considerable look at things. And I'm confident in the process going forward. We've done pretty amazing work here in the last 6 weeks. And so I think we're going to continue to do that, no matter if we're sitting in a building or staring at a computer screen like this. So I appreciate the effort. I think, I'm supportive of what's being presented, and I'm looking forward to working in the future here on this. So thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. First, I want to say thanks for taking it back, administrators, relooking at everything. We asked you to get it to 3 million. That's what you came back with. I appreciate that. I think in the future there will be deeper cuts. I agree with most of the board members here that we will have deeper cuts. We need to look at all areas. I guess, the essential worker part, I can't think of anybody in the district that isn't essential. And that's tough. I mean, I'm not devaluing one position over another. They're all important. And so that's what's going to make it super hard going forward. And so the less cuts that we have to make right now to make things work in this coming budget, the more comfortable I am with it. Knowing that the cuts are going to get harder next time. And I do appreciate the outline moving forward. I agree with Stacy in that we need to get going on this sooner. We need to have more input as a board. We need more input from stakeholders. We need more back and forth comments and discussion with stakeholders so that they understand where we're at. And that's going to be critical in the success of the next budget. And I also think it would be helpful for the community to be more involved in it as we move forward to get a tech levy passed or to get another operating levy passed, that they are educated and understand where we're at, that we're not just asking for money for the sake of asking for money, because there are people that think that, or that we're wasting money or we're overspending money. There were some other comments made by board members, but I think they were addressed. I agree with many of the things Michael said, especially regarding opening Redtail or Hamilton Ridge. I did live through the Redtail Ridge situation, and we owe it to our taxpayers to use the money that they voted for to open up that elementary school. And then we just need to see how we can make that work most efficiently. Class sizes, we voted on those class sizes, and we're trying to get back to where they're supposed to be. And if we don't want them there, then I agree, we need to have more discussion. And a lot of the things that everyone brought up, I think, are good things to discuss. But I think for tonight, I think we need to look at what's been presented to us and move forward. We asked for 3 million. Administration came back with 3 million in adjustments. I think that's most of my notes. Does anyone have any other comments they'd like to make? Jonathan?
I just quickly want to revisit one thing that I said and that a couple of people chimed in and agreed with me. I made the comment about feeling good about there not being additional people cut. And one of the things that I think I failed to mention, if I were one of the people within the community ed world or Kids Company or any of the folks who have already been affected by this, and I were listening to this study session, I would have been a little bit offended by what. And so I do want to acknowledge that this has not been without pain. There's already been pain. I think we all feel good about limiting the additional folks who are going to have to suffer through that. And we look forward to being able to have all those folks hopefully back on the payroll and sooner rather than. So I just briefly wanted to correct myself, I think, in saying that. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Mary?
I did bring up something that I know is quite controversial at the last board meeting, and I wanted to know if we could open that up for discussion. simply because, I do believe that if we're going to impose pain on others, then we need to do something ourselves. Because whereas there is a level of essentialness, I do believe that the teachers and the individuals that are dealing with the situation right now and helping our students deserve to know that they're not in this alone. And I was wondering if it would be an appropriate time to bring that up for discussion.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
I'm referring to the motion that I made last time.
Oh, you want to,
About-
that really can't be a motion, but you want to discuss the board, the stipend? You want to have a discussion?
Correct. Correct, because I made the motion, it was a legal motion, but several board members said that they would be open to discuss it, and is this the right time to do it, Lee?
Well, it's not on the table for this budget reduction, but if people want to discuss it and I could start, I completely disagree with giving up the board stipend. I think it's a personal choice. And if people want to donate their money back to the district, I think they are more than, they're just be glad to take the money back. And if it's important to them to do that, I think it goes back to being an individual choice. I don't think it requires a motion. I don't think it requires any kind of direction from the board as a whole. But I would like to say with that stipend, it does help with cost to attend meetings. We're basically volunteers if we figure out how much we make. Many of us spend a lot of time in school board activity, making decisions, researching. It's not just about a board meeting or a work session twice a month, or even a couple committee meetings. And I think that it's just kind of a nice thank you. It's not a lot of money. It's not going to make or break this district. And the other thing is, we want to attract future candidates to run for the school board. And I personally feel that you shouldn't have to cost you money and a babysitter so that you could volunteer for the school board or whatever other cost you might incur by being on the school board. And if it can help pay for those costs, it might just make some younger, more involved, maybe parents get involved in the school board. And again, I'll go back to the attendance. Some of us are at every meeting and don't miss much. And there are some that miss quite a few. So I think, again, it goes back to personal choice. So that's my opinion, and I'll open it up to the rest of the board if they have anything else they'd like to say. I'm not saying, Jonathan?
I do think, Mary, that it's a reasonable thing to bring up at a time like this. I would have support the idea that it would be a choice made by individual board members. I do think it could potentially impact with an election coming up. It could potentially have an impact on being able to have qualified good candidates. And so it's my understanding that there are members of our board in the past and perhaps even now that have done that and made that choice. And I think that's an admirable thing to do. I would not support the elimination. I would not support the elimination of
Anyone else? Melissa?
Thanks, Lee. I would disagree with Jonathan in terms of the quote that you had said, qualified good candidates might not be attracted to the position. When I applied, I had no idea that there was even compensation. You can have qualified good candidates and take half of the compensation and still be able to cover all the babysitters at $3K. I'd be more than willing to say at least halfway that it would be a wonderful, not just a token of or gesture, but I think everybody has to feel some pain here. And I would immediately suggest at least half of the compensation be reduced and still be able to have no impact. We can't think about an impact of an election in a budget time like this for a school board person. So I would disagree there, and I would be willing to definitely put down on paper in a budget a 50% reduction for school board member.
Anyone else? Michael?
I think one thing we should do is be clear with the public and this and teachers and everybody else that our stipend is $6,000 a year before taxes for 12 months of work. And anybody who wants to donate, I think that is their choice. I also think if you'd like recognition for it, we could have a special, proclamation or something so we know who donated their salary. That's fine with me. I have met with people over the last year and a half who have asked more about school board. I think we need more diversity on our school board, and that includes economic diversity. I don't know what everybody else's schedule is like for how much time they put in. I am at every single meeting, and there are weeks I put in way more than 40 hours a week, and I give up other jobs from my independent work to do this. For me, it's not just a matter of I'll cancel a vacation. Any money I goes to medical bills, as most of you know. So it is a real hit for me, and I put in a lot of time, but it's not about me even as much as the type of people I've been talking to who might be interested in school board. One wonderful woman brought her 10-month-old baby with her to sit and visit with me, and she's in healthcare. And we have people who might work 2 or 3 jobs that don't get a voice at the table. We just don't get that economic diversity. And I do think it makes a difference going forward. $6,000 is not a lot of money to some people here, but it is for other people who will think twice. I didn't take this job to get a stipend. But once I got on the board, I work really, really hard, and I'm sure most of you do too. It would compare in no way to what a teacher does or our admin team does. But I literally give up other work to advocate at so many different levels and with the committees and people. I spend so much time on the phone and listening to stakeholders and in the schools. So I think it's really an important message going forward that we don't say it's only people who can afford to volunteer can be on the board. However, I'm all for gratefully thanking anybody who donates their salary back because I think that's amazing. And I think you deserve to be recognized for it. So that's my thoughts.
Anyone else? Stacy?
I guess my thoughts on this would be somewhat similar to Michael in the sense that, when I started out on the journey almost 10 years ago, I didn't have a job and I was doing this, kind of as community work. And I had young kids. And yeah, I used it for a babysitter. And, once you take the taxes out, it's a lot less than the 6,000. So I do think that it would taint the candidate pool. To me, this sounds, I don't know if this is going to be a slogan in the fall or, it just doesn't seem appropriate for me to hear talk around this. We definitely can donate our salaries. And like Michael said, I think if you want to put it on the donation list, that's and you want recognition for it, I would totally support that. I think if we wanted to look at a model of hours and attendance, I think we can look at that as far as meetings attending and just the record of attendance over the last couple of years. If we wanted to do a stipend or deregulate based on missing meetings, that'd be something we can look at. But I would not support at all any type of change in this.
Anyone else?
I just want to say, I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly wouldn't want recognition for, and I don't ask for 90% of what I do, and nor do I, like I said, nor do I want it. But usually as leaders, it's important that we show that we feel the pain. And I think that there is something that we need to do or we should be doing. And it has nothing to do with economics or anything like that. You know, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about who has the economics and what's going on and who actually has 3 or 4 people in their immediate family who actually are with terminal cancer. This isn't a competition of who has whatever. I think it's a statement. I think we need to do something to show that we are doing what we can do. And typical as we see in the market, I mean, the CEOs of major companies have forfeited their entire compensation for the year, particularly as they have been laying off people. That is typical. It happened during the first recession, and it's happening now all over the place. It is a statement. And if we choose to make statements in different ways, then so be it. But I would ask that this conversation continue. You know, I like lots of other people. This isn't the only board that I'm on. It certainly isn't the only volunteer thing, and I've been doing it since I got out of college. And I think what's important is that we do something to show that we understand what it is to be an essential worker. And quite frankly, although I agree with Terry and some others that say we all are essential, I don't believe we're as essential as those teachers that are online with their kids every day and in that classroom when it's there. And when we're asking them to give up more and more of their free time, and a lot of those guys have little kids too, just like I did just a few years ago. And I do believe it's the gesture, it's the thought, and I think we should continue the discussion to think about ways that we can give as leaders to live as an example.
I appreciate your thoughts, Mary. I also got on the school board, didn't know I got paid, and that's not why I'm on the school board, because if it was for pay, I wouldn't be. There's different kinds of pain. There's different kinds of things that people give up to be on the school board. They miss things. They miss things with their families. They have to make some tough choices sometimes. So it's not like we're not feeling some pain. I think we all are. And we can certainly continue the discussion when we look at the budget cuts or the budget adjustments in the next go around. I don't know that that's appropriate to do at this time. Our budget is where we asked our administrators to get it to. I think we can leave it where it's at. And I would encourage anyone that wants to donate their money back to the school district should absolutely do it. It's a wonderful gesture. If you want to do it, go ahead. I mean, it doesn't have to be a voted board motion. But we can continue the discussion if the board so chooses in the future. Any other comments on the budget? Terry, did you get information that you needed before we move on?
I did, Lee. I know that there were a lot of things that we talked about 2 weeks ago, and there were some additional things that were brought up tonight. And we will continue this process. At this point, though, I did not hear direction to change the recommendation from tonight for the 4th. So unless I hear differently, we will plan on bringing forth this recommendation and seek approval for the recommendation at the May 4th meeting.
Okay, I guess I do want to make one more comment, and that is when we talk about essential workers, and I alluded to this a little while ago, but just want to thank the childcare workers that we have that are hands-on, frontline, and our nutritional staff and our transportation. They're doing a fabulous job, and I just want to say thank you to them, and I don't want to forget about them. Our teachers are also doing a great job, but I don't want to forget about the other people out there that are working very hard. So thank you to them. And then we will, hearing nothing to the negative, I agree, Terry, that you can bring this forward at the May 4th meeting. And is there discussion on enrollment update and legislative updates. Julie, is that you? Is there anything more with that?
There really hasn't been any changes in our enrollment since I reported last meeting. And I really didn't expect any. So we are still a little short of our anticipated goal for the fall. We do start to ramp up in July when school starts coming back online, and we'll see what happens this year with everything that's going on. And hopefully we'll get there. We're not much short, and we're still a few short in kindergarten. So hopefully those students will enroll, and we should meet our 125 students goal. And I don't really have any legislative changes. I haven't heard much there. So maybe Terry has something more that I've heard, but right now I haven't heard anything more.
No, Julie, I think we're all watching the bills that are coming forward, and some slight but incredibly important differences in the House and the Senate bills regarding the relief to school districts. So I think that we all need to continue to watch to see if decisions are made in terms of some of the funding relief, and also in terms of what the guidance is moving forward. And I'll just when we get to the information items, I do have a couple things just to share with you regarding that.
Okay. Well, we're really good at putting off policy, it seems like. It's now almost 8:25. Wondering what the board's appetite is for starting in policies. If we're going to, I was going to suggest we start with policy 213, school board committees. There's not much change there. Is everyone wanting to stay on the screen for a little while longer for policy or not? It's been 2.5 hours. Stacy?
I'd like to get like one done at least.
Somehow I knew you'd say that.
I'm in agreement. 213 sounds like a safe way to get out of here in a time.
Okay.
In a good time.
All right. If everyone had looked at 213 school board committees, there was a renaming of the facilities committee, and then an addition of committees of the whole. I have it in front of me. Does anyone have any comments about it?
Can I go?
Yes, Stacy. Sorry.
Just because we looked at this so long ago, it's just really, it reflects practice right now, our current practice of what we have for committees, and how committees of the whole function for the board. So it's just really reflective of how we are operating now.
Any other comments or questions?
I do.
Mary?
I agree with that. I think we've cut back on a lot of the committees itself, that I'm not quite sure is all that great, but I do like the idea that finance goes to the full board. One of the things, Lee, that I know you and I talked about is they call it the three legs of the school board, and it goes with any other education board, about your curriculum, your finances, and then your superintendent oversight. I noticed we didn't make any changes to the curriculum here per se, but I would ask that, we increased it from 1 to 2, which I think is good. I actually think that's a committee, the District Curriculum Advisory Council, that could stand to have a full 3 board members on it if we cut back on anything else. And I'm not quite sure if that's something anybody else wants to consider. If it's not, I'm not going to fight for it. I just want to put it out there.
Does it, Jonathan?
As second person on that committee, I'd actually, Mary, I think I would tend to agree with you. I mean, ultimately, our most important work is educating kids, and so I'd be open to that as well. Again, like you said, if it didn't turn out to add a third board member, I'd be fine with that as well. But I've learned in my first year on that committee an awful lot of things that I did not know. There's there's a lot going on in that group, and it's important to our mission as a board. So I would actually support that if we could find a way to reduce the load somewhere else for committee assignments.
As I'm looking at this policy, I don't see where we say how many people are on that committee. I'm not opposed to it either. It's a huge committee. I was on it years ago, and I think we had 3 on it at that time. As long as we don't go to 4.
Can I just make comment?
Go ahead, Stacey.
I think when this was changed or whatever, there was just a balance of, because the majority of the work would be in like facilities and the public engagement and legislative committee. I'm trying to find where curriculum's listed.
It's in 111.5.
Oh, okay. Yes. And I guess, I mean, I would be open to it too. I think the only thing would be, I would want to make sure, I would probably want Jeff's input on that since he pretty much runs that committee. And then the other thing would be that we aren't missing other committees being representative, because I'm not sure about other attendance at some of these things. And so I guess I would need to know that we're totally covered in the other areas.
From a historical perspective, we've gone from 2 board members to 3, and I think most recently back to 2. And I think where the decision has been made comes in January with board assignments. So we've done 2 and 3 board members in the past on curriculum advisory. Either is fine. I think to your point, Stacey, it's just balancing the work of the district and making sure that everybody's has a committee assignment and reports back to the board. So we're up for either. But I think that's largely when that decision has been made.
Mary?
Well, I know in the first 2 years that I was on the board, I was the only committee member on the curriculum committee, and I had talked with Lee and said, I asked for 3 then, and we got up to 2. But I do understand that we need to balance and make sure we've got enough people on other committees. But she's right. We don't mention the number here. And I think before this, it was 1. And I think I didn't find out it was going to be 2, that the change was actually made until we opened up the board on in early 2019. So I'm not quite sure how to handle that.
Melissa?
6 years ago when I was on district advisory, there were 2 of us. I think 2 or 3 are good. I question if we need board representation on ECFE and community ed.
Michael, did you want to speak to that? I was on.
I've been on them before.
I was on both before, and
I currently am.
that group of people is very appreciative of having been able to be recognized at the I guess being part of the group and being recognized by the board. But I haven't been on it for a while, so maybe Michael could speak to it.
I would not recommend taking people off those committees. For one thing, the relationship with the parents has been incredible. They love having an engaged board member at the ECFE one, at the Early Childhood Committee. And they ask me to be involved in all the extra activities to further engagement in the community, going to the early reading nights, going to registration nights, just kind of as a board presence. To answer questions, and the same with community ed too. It's not just being the board liaison, but then going to the events that they host and volunteering and talking to the community so that I can bring those concerns and issues back to the board. I think it's a really, partly my bias might come because my 3rd committee is engagement and legislative. And so I really have an eye for how are we engaging our community. And I just feel like those 2 committees really allow for public interaction with a board member in a positive way. So I love being on those committees, and I put a lot of hours in, and I just feel like it's a really valuable way to connect with our stakeholders.
Yeah, I second Michael. I don't think we should lose board representation on any of those at the expense of adding more people onto the curriculum. I think they are important. They are under board purview. My suggestion with the curriculum basically was because it's an overriding, it's an umbrella level curriculum. Committee, but I want to make it clear that I do not want extra people on there at the expense of these other committees.
With that said, do we want to put the numbers on a committee, or do we want to see the numbers that are presently on the committees? I could ask Martha to send out that form if you don't already have it. I hesitate to do some of the numbers because it starts to get a little more procedural rather than policy. And a change could be easily made if we want to increase numbers at our organizational meeting in January. I think that's when you were referring to, Mary. I got Stacy waving at me here.
I was just going to make a comment. I think, to your point, I think it can be up to the purview. When the chair is going around trying to figure out, who wants what or where there's interest. I mean, we didn't really say 2 members because it was 1. It was kind of up to your purview, and that went through, accepted or whatever. So I don't know. I guess I wouldn't want to limit. I mean, so maybe we feel like one year there is a year that we need to have 3 on there because something coming down or whatever. I think it's working now, in my opinion. And hopefully I don't think it's at the expense of any other committee. So I would just advocate that it's working now and to continue as is.
With that said, what if Stacy reminded me, a lot of times the chair in the fall reaches out to all the board members to find out, what committees they're interested in or what they feel about the committees. And I think Mary, you and I had a discussion about the curriculum before one of those. And maybe that's how the 2 came about. I'm trying to remember exactly that conversation. I'd hesitate to put a lot of numbers on here because it gets procedural. But I do think it's valid to look at the numbers. I have no problem with that as long as we're protecting all the other committees. Jonathan?
I was just going to say, I think the numbers are. I think it's fine if there's a number attached just to FLRP, and we leave this to the discretion and kind of negotiation of members and the chair at committee assignment time. But I think we'll all, at least this group, will remember the idea that we maybe want more on curriculum. But I think in putting it in policy, I'm not necessarily concerned about putting it in the policy.
Any other comments? Okay, well, this is our first time going around with it, so it will come back again at the next meeting. And I think then, going with one policy for tonight, we'll move on to the superintendent relations. Terry?
I don't have anything there, but I would have something under the information one underneath it.
Okay.
I just wanted to share with you, and many of you already spoke to it, just the continued gratitude to our staff, our students, and our families for the amazing things that they are doing right now. Today I got the opportunity. It's school lunch staff appreciation week. And so I got a chance to be in all 3 kitchens today. I got the data from Emily Malone. We served 4,469 meals today. I also stopped at Westwood with the child care. We had 42 students that I got a chance to see learning with staff who didn't know these kids and are building relationships and supporting these kids. We had a high school assistant principal who was the administrator on site today, and he was interacting with the staff and the students. So just incredibly proud. I think somebody earlier today used the term heroic, and I would say that we have 1,250 employees in Prior Lake Savage area schools who on a daily basis have been heroic, probably before. I know before all of this, but certainly since. So I wanted to share that. I know that you've gotten some questions and we're getting questions about graduation. And I know one of the things Dr. Bigzik has been collecting some data, meeting with some seniors to look at some of our options. And I want you to know that if one of the options and one of them that is being explored is looking at a potential postponement date if we're unable to hold graduation in May. If that is the case, we would come back to the board for approval because that is a changing calendar. So just kind of wanted to make sure that you had that just in your mind. So hopefully if that were to happen, we'd get something to you by the May 4th board meeting. And then I'm sure you're all aware of this as well, but with the latest of the executive orders to extend distance learning, we will have the executive order requires professional development and planning days on May 1st, which is Friday, and May 4th, which is Monday. So those will be days that our staff has for continued reflection, learning, and planning. We'll have some, I'm sure, time for learning teams. Jeff and his team are planning some district-wide PD options. We're meeting with principals tomorrow to kind of see, as they're assessing the responses that have come in from their stakeholders about how things are going, an opportunity to just say, okay, where are some places we might want to improve? And we'll be able to do that. So just wanted to share with you that those will not be instructional days for our students. And our staff will be planning on the extension of the distance learning days. So just wanted to update you on those things. Thank you very much.
I guess I'd like to share one thing. And I think an email went out to all the board members, but there was a Zoom meeting with the governor last Friday. And it is recorded and you can listen to it. But some of the big topics that, and MSBA did a great job with it, by the way, but one of the big requests, they had two. One was local decision so that they could have make some of these decisions regarding graduation, end of school events, if there were going to be any, as long as they followed the guidelines, could they have local decision on that? And the other was just to kind of let them know that financially we need help with devices, the tech capacity. It's not just the devices, it also is the availability of the Wi-Fi and help with that. And of course, money. The governor did say that he's expecting schools to continue the meal program and continue childcare. And when he was getting off of the call with us, he was talking to Vice President Pence. So I'm not sure where that went, but I haven't seen any great news coming from it yet. So it was good to listen to it. It's about a half hour if you get a chance to do it. And I know MSBA has something else coming up, I think on Thursday. I don't remember the time, but it's another Zoom meeting. So, and if there's no other information to be shared, I don't see anybody. If the public has anything they'd like, oh, Terry.
I believe that meeting is 9 o'clock. The MSBA Zoom meeting looks like it's 9 o'clock on Thursday.
Okay, that sounds familiar. That sounds right. I don't have it.
That's what I've got on my calendar anyway.
All right, great. And after the public has listened to the meeting this evening, if they would like to send us an email, that would be the form of community feedback we would be able to work with. So you're welcome to do that. And with that, I guess I don't need a motion, but we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.